How will the world end? I mean, it's literally the ultimate question, isn't it? Throughout history, we've looked up at the stars, pored over our sacred texts, and just wondered how the final chapter of human history is actually going to go down. So today, in this explainer, we're going to take a structured look at some of the most fascinating, complex, and honestly intensely debated theological maps out there regarding the end of the world.
But first, let's clearly define our academic sandbox here. Eschatology. It's essentially the theological study of the last things, or the end times. You know, whenever you hear scholars debating the timeline of the apocalypse, the return of Christ, or the ultimate destiny of humanity, well, they're engaging in eschatology. By defining this framework right off the bat, we can navigate these super deep theological waters with a whole lot more clarity.
Welcome to the Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this material today. Our main objective here is to take some seriously dense academic eschatological frameworks, specifically drawing from the lectures of Dr. Robert A. Peterson, and demystify them. We're going to visualize the timelines, break down the terminology, and see exactly where and why brilliant scholars disagree on how the end of the world will actually unfold.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. Here's our agenda for today. First, we'll look at the 4 end times varieties. Second, the dispensational premillennial view. Third, 3 views on the rapture. Fourth, tracking the resurrections. And finally, finding common theological ground. Starting off with Section 1, the 4 end times varieties, the baseline agreement uniting Orthodox views. Before we wade into these seriously divisive weeds of end times timelines, it's absolutely crucial to anchor ourselves in the foundational concepts. Dr. Peterson uses this brilliant mnemonic to summarize these shared truths, the RULE agreement. R stands for the return of Christ. U playfully stands for up, signifying the physical resurrection of the dead. L is the last judgment, and E stands for eternal destinies, meaning the new heavens, the new earth, and hell. Now, what's really cool about this is the idea of a transparency overlay. Just imagine taking the wildly complex, differing timeline charts of every major eschatological view, amillennial, postmillennial, premillennial, and stacking them all on top of one another. The middle parts, they might look like a total messy, tangled web, but these 4 core RULE points, they'd align perfectly. They are the universally agreed upon bedrock.
Moving on to Section 2, the dispensational premillennial view, zooming into these specific theological mechanics.
Okay, so premillennialism broadly proposes a literal cataclysmic return of Christ to earth, right? Which will then initiate a 1,000-year earthly kingdom, the millennium. But dispensational premillennialism adds some really unique, highly specific layers to this. It argues for a distinctively Jewish character of this future kingdom. Historically championed by super influential theologians like Charles Ryrie, this framework reads Old Testament prophecies quite literally. It suggests that during this future millennium, there's going to be a restored temple and even a return to certain sacrifices. It sees this really sharp, ongoing distinction in the biblical text between the church and the nation of Israel, arguing that this future kingdom specifically fulfills uncompleted promises that were made to Israel.
And this brilliantly illustrates the major fracture point here. On one side, you've got amillennial, postmillennial, and historic premillennial views, and they all share the belief in a single-stage return. Christ comes back once, period. But on the other side, dispensational premillennialism uniquely splits the second coming into a 2-stage return. First, you have a secret or sudden catching away of believers in the air, which is known as the Rapture. Then there's a period of severe global turmoil, followed by the second stage, Christ's actual physical return to the earth to establish the millennium.
All right, Section 3, 3 views on the rapture, the internal debate over timing.
Now that we've established this unique 2-stage return, we actually find fierce internal debate over the exact timing of that first stage, the rapture. To really understand it, we have to look at their anchor point, the tribulation. The tribulation is essentially a prophesied 7-year period of just unprecedented global trouble, judgment, and disaster. It's often referred to in these circles as the time of Jacob's trouble. So the massive theological question is this. Where exactly does the church fit into this terrifying 7-year window? Are they on earth for it or not? Let's take a look at the 3 main answers to that exact question.
The first, and perhaps the most popular in mainstream evangelicalism, is the pre-tribulational rapture. Favored by scholars like John Walvoord, this timeline starts with the rapture. So the church is caught up in the air before the tribulation even begins. For the next 7 years, the Great Tribulation just ravages the earth, but the church is entirely absent, safely spared from the coming wrath.
Then, at the very end of those 7 years, the second stage happens. Christ returns to earth with the church to kick off the millennium.
Next up, we shift to the mid-tribulational rapture timeline. Now, this view argues that the church actually does enter the tribulation period. Notice the halfway mark in this framework, 3.5 years in. That corresponds with the sounding of the 7th trumpet in Revelation, and this is when the rapture occurs. Why the midpoint, though? Well, scholars in this camp draw a big distinction between general tribulation and the specific vials of God's wrath. They argue the church will definitely experience the hardship of that first half, but is raptured out just before God pours out his ultimate, unmitigated wrath in the second half.
And finally, we have the post-tribulational rapture timeline, which is championed by scholars like George Ladd. In this view, the church is present on earth for the entirety of the 7-year tribulation. Ladd argued that, historically speaking, God doesn't just take his people out of the world to save them, he protects them through the judgments. So following this timeline, the church goes right through the tribulation, and at the very end, they're caught up in the air to meet Christ, and then immediately turn around and descend back to earth with him in total triumph. The rapture and the second coming effectively just merge into one continuous, spectacular event.
Section 4, Tracking the Resurrections, How Changing the Timeline Changes the Resurrection Count.
Let's move to and see how this builds into another major debate. Because when you start splitting the end of the world into distinct stages, like adding a rapture and a literal 1,000-year millennium, you don't just change the timeline, you actually fragment the number of times dead bodies are literally resurrected from the grave. Let's ground this in the text. Consider Daniel 12:2. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame. Look, all Orthodox views universally agree on physical, bodily resurrection based on passages like this, as well as Jesus' own words in John chapter 5. Basically, everyone agrees the dead will rise. What they fiercely disagree on is the sequence and the sorting of those resurrections.
The crucial point really just comes down to this theological math. If you hold the amillennial or postmillennial view, it's super simple. There's one single general resurrection at the very end of time for both the righteous and the wicked. If you're an historic premillennialist, well, you read Revelation 20 and see 2 resurrections. Believers are raised before the 1,000-year millennium, and unbelievers are raised after it. But if you're a dispensational premillennialist, your timeline dictates 3 distinct resurrections. First, the dead church saints rise at the rapture. Second, Old Testament and tribulation saints rise just before the millennium. And remember, they view the millennium as a Jewish economy, so these saints rise to participate in it. And third, the unbelievers are raised at the very end for the last judgment. That's 3 totally separate events, born entirely out of how the timeline is structured.
Section 5, Finding Common Theological Ground, Navigating the Millennial Maze.
We've spent this explainer super deep in the weeds of timelines, tribulation points, and resurrection counts. So why does navigating this millennial maze actually matter? Well, first, we kind of have to acknowledge reality here. As Dr. Robert Peterson bluntly states, the exegesis of the different parties is fixed. We're dug in. Scholars have literally spent lifetimes studying passages like Revelation 20 and Daniel 12, and they've arrived at mathematically contradictory timelines. A text obviously cannot mean 2 completely contradictory things at the exact same time. These academic positions are firmly entrenched, and, the debate isn't going to be neatly resolved anytime soon. But that absolutely doesn't mean studying this stuff is pointless. Far from it. Just consider this powerful sentiment from theologian Stanley Grenz. We can learn from each of the millennial positions. What's so fascinating about Grenz is that he personally transitioned through 3 different eschatological views in his lifetime, yet he maintained a spirit of profound respect for all of them. Think about it. From dispensationalism, we learn to take biblical prophecy seriously. From postmillennialism, we absorb a deep, driving optimism about the power of the gospel to actually change culture. By looking impartially at every single perspective, we just gain a much richer, more multidimensional understanding of these ancient texts. And that brilliantly brings us to our final thought for today. If brilliant, utterly sincere scholars can look at the exact same ancient texts and differ so wildly on the precise timeline, how does exploring their diverse perspectives enrich our own understanding of the future? The real value isn't just in picking the right chart to hang on your wall. The value is in seeing the incredible depth, the mystery, and the hope embedded in the study of last things. It forces us to ask the bigger questions, to look closer at the sources, and to realize that while the exact timeline might be heavily debated, that shared baseline, the ultimate return and restoration of all things, remains firmly, unshakably in place. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.